All right, President Trump makes fresh comments. Of course, Sarah mentioned it this morning, reportedly on stalled talks with China, arguing the country has, quote, totally violated its agreement with the U.S. Let's get to Eunice Yoon. She's in Beijing. She has more for us and perhaps a response as well from the government over there. Eunice.
Thanks, David. Well, so far the Chinese have not responded. But what President Trump is probably talking about is that the Chinese have been dragging their feet on removing export controls of certain rare earth metals. So in that Geneva agreement, the Chinese not only agreed to remove counter tariffs, but also certain non-tariff measures. The rare earths export curbs were not specifically named, but the non-tariff measures were supposed to be ones that were imposed in April. So it was widely expected that the Chinese would remove these export curbs. One thing that's also interesting is that unlike the tariffs, the removal of the non-tariff barriers didn't have a time frame. So there's been a lot of discussion here as to why the Chinese are not removing these rare earth export curbs. One camp believes that it could be a processing issue. The other camp believes that this is being purposely done in order to gain leverage on the future negotiations. And I have to say, guys, that this is quite a standard Chinese negotiating tactic where there have been plenty of business people who've said that the Chinese often will stick to the letter of an agreement, but not necessarily to the spirit of an agreement, or sometimes when they're in negotiations with the Chinese, that the Chinese will reinterpret certain agreements after the fact. And so because of that, people are seeing this, at least in the business community, as a way for the Chinese to gain leverage in order not to make some sort of concession.
So do you have any... Has there been official communication as to what comes next and how willing the Chinese are to come back to the table and fix this?
Well, I think it depends on whether or not you think the Chinese really want to have a trade deal. From the Chinese perspective, of course, they don't want to have tariffs or something that could hurt them economically speaking. But from a political perspective, they see this as more of a problem for President Trump, that Trump is the one who's really hitched his political success to having trade deals to justify his tariff policy. From a Chinese perspective, they don't have that same worry.
Eunice, appreciate that. Eunice Yoon in Beijing tonight.